You know, we often think of the U.S. and Canada as, well, almost seamless partners, right? Especially when it comes to making movies and TV shows.
Yeah, the collaboration is huge.
But what if things are about to get surprisingly complicated? For Canadian actors, for crews working on American shows, maybe starting as soon as 2025.
Uh-huh.
We're talking potential headaches, at the border with your phone, your laptop,
Right.
worries about what you can say online,
Right.
and even like bigger policies that could just throw a wrench into entire productions.
It's a lot to unpack.
Stick with us because we've been digging into some, frankly, surprising stuff.
And what's really interesting here is that this isn't just abstract talk. These concerns are being voiced quite publicly by people involved in the show from...
Right, like Sean Majumdar.
Exactly. Sean Majumdar, Douglas E. Hughes. They're talking about how current U.S. policies and sort of the general climate could really affect Canadian entertainment professionals working on shows just like theirs.
And that's clearly hitting a nerve with fans.
Oh, absolutely. It's actually sparked this fan campaign, #ProtectFromily.
Protect Fromily, like from family.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about raising awareness of these potential issues facing the show and its people.
That's fantastic fan dedication. So to really get a handle on what might be coming, we've looked at a whole bunch of sources.
Mm-hmm. News reports, interviews.
Yeah, clips from Access Hollywood, FOX 13 Seattle, Global News, CBC, Amanpour and Company. Plus, YouTube discussions, articles looking at policy changes.
Real mix.
Our mission today really is to unpack these potential disruptions, give you a clear, concise understanding of what might be at stake, especially thinking about that #ProtectFromily context.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's dive in with something that seems to be making a lot of people uneasy. What actually happens when you, as a Canadian, cross the U.S. border with your phone or your laptop?
Right. This really brings up a huge point about privacy. Or potential lack of it.
How so?
Well, U.S. border officers, they have pretty significant authority to search your electronic devices. We're talking phones, laptops, tablets.
And they don't need a warrant for that.
No. It falls under something called the border search exception. It's a long-standing legal principle, but how it's applied to digital devices is, well, still evolving and causing concern.
Okay, that sounds incredibly broad. So what if someone says, hang on, I'd rather you didn't search my phone? What happens then?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. Refusing a search, it can lead to some pretty serious consequences. You could be denied entry right there. They could seize your device, keep it, or you might even be detained.
Wow. Okay. Now, is this happening all the time?
To give it some perspective, data from US CBP, that's Customs and Border Protection from 2024, suggests about 0.1% of travelers had devices searched. So statistically small.
But still.
But still, the potential for it and maybe increased scrutiny, that's definitely a worry for people crossing regularly, like actors or crew might.
And it seems like the Canadian government is definitely aware of this.
They are. They've actually updated their official travel advisory for the U.S.
What does it say?
It warns Canadians about this, quote, significant discretion border agents have, and it specifically mentions searching electronic devices. Their advice, essentially, cooperate.
Just comply.
Pretty much, which is why immigration lawyers, people like Heather Segal and Adam Schwartz, they're advising Canadians to be really cautious.
What kind of advice?
Things like maybe using a temporary burner phone for travel, leaving your personal devices back home if you can.
Really? Go that far?
Or at the very least, putting devices in airplane mode before you get to the border crossing. Just limiting what's immediately accessible.
That makes sense, I guess, as a precaution. And look, these aren't just like hypothetical worries anymore, are they? We've seen some actual cases that are pretty troubling.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are documented incidents. There's the case of Dr. Rasha Alaway, a Lebanese professor. She was deported reportedly after agents found deleted photos on her phone.
Deleted photos.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Jasmine Mooney. She's a Canadian actress. She ended up being detained for 12 days.
12 days? What happened there? That sounds incredibly stressful.
It sounds horrendous. She was trying to renew her work visa, something she'd apparently done successfully before at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Okay.
Initially, she was told it was just some kind of paperwork issue. But then suddenly she was apprehended.
Just like that.
Yeah. And she described the detention conditions as very difficult. Sleeping on concrete floors, not getting proper food, having basically no information about what was happening or for how long, and the outcome. She was banned from the U.S. for 5 years.
5 years. What was the official reason given?
Well, the statement from IC Immigration and Customs Enforcement said she was detained because she didn't have the correct legal documentation, and they specifically referenced a Trump-era executive order in that explanation.
Huh. But the impact.
hmm
It's not just the personal hardship, is it?
No, exactly. Think about the chilling effect. If you're a Canadian actor or crew member, hearing stories like that, the uncertainty, the fear of something similar happening, it could absolutely make people hesitant.
Yeah, you might think twice about taking a job south of the border. Or maybe self-censor online if you think that could cause issues.
Precisely. It potentially impacts the whole ecosystem of cross-border creative work.
And it doesn't sound like Mooney's case is totally unique, unfortunately.
No. There was also Becky Burke, a British cartoonist. She was detained in Tacoma, Washington.
What was her situation?
It seemed to be a misunderstanding about her visa type. She was on a tourist visa, but participating in a program called Workaway. Her lawyer basically argued that CBP, the Border Patrol, could have just sorted it out, maybe arranged a flight home, shown a bit more compassion instead of detaining her.
It really highlights how much power, how much discretion these individual officers have at the border.
It absolutely does, and how that discretion gets applied can have huge consequences.
And are we seeing more Canadians actually being turned away or banned?
There are reports suggesting an increase, yeah. Expedited removals, that's the formal term for being quickly removed and often banned. They apparently almost doubled for Canadians in the past year or so, from around 300 to over 600.
Wow.
There was even this case of a cyclist from Quebec named Cole. He was reportedly banned just for trying to apply for a TN visa at the border, which is usually for certain professionals.
So even trying to follow the rules can backfire sometimes.
It seems that way in some cases, yes.
Yeah.
And remember Fadwa Alawi, a Canadian Muslim woman.
Legally, yes.
She was turned away after being questioned extensively about her religion, which mosque she attended, even about videos on her phone.
It paints a really unpredictable picture, doesn't it? A crossing that could feel quite invasive for Canadians heading south for work or leisure.
Unpredictable and potentially invasive, yeah.
Okay, so that's the border crossing itself. But let's shift gears a bit. Another big area of concern seems to be around free speech. How might that play out for Canadian talent?
Right, this is another complex layer. We've talked about the physical border. Now let's look at, well, the less tangible borders around expression.
Especially for artists, yeah.
So you've got dynamics on both sides. In Canada, there's legislation like Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act.
Right, that's been controversial.
It has. The aim is to regulate streaming platforms, promote Canadian content, but there are concerns, that the regulations could end up impacting what creators feel they can post online, especially if they have big U.S. audiences.
And there was talks of an Online Harms Act, too.
Yes, that's also proposed. The worry with these kinds of laws generally is the potential for fines or penalties limiting online expression. Could it lead to a kind of self-censorship for Canadian actors who work internationally? Maybe.
Okay, so that's the Canadian side. What about when they're physically working in the U.S.? Do they have free speech rights there?
Yes, generally, Canadian citizens in the U.S. do have First Amendment rights, freedom of speech.
But I sense a but coming.
But there's a critical distinction. The speech of non-citizens can be scrutinized more closely, especially if it's seen as being, let's say, against U.S. interests or policies.
Ah, okay. And this is where potential shifts in U.S. policy become really relevant.
Exactly. For instance, the previous Trump administration put out an executive order, I think it was January 2025, focused on protecting free speech.
Okay.
But the wording specifically emphasized protecting speech for American citizens. It didn't explicitly extend those same protections to non-citizens working or visiting the U.S.
That distinction feels significant.
It does. And we have seen examples that highlight this potential risk. Remember the case of Mahmoud Khalil?
Remind me.
His visa was reportedly revoked after he participated in some pro-Palestinian protests. It underscores the vulnerability non-citizens might face if their political expressions don't align with current U.S. government views.
So expressing certain views could potentially jeopardize your visa status, your ability to work there.
It's a potential risk, yes. And it's not just individual speech. There are these broader concerns, too, about the whole media landscape.
Like what?
Well, you hear discussions around things like Project 2025, which includes proposals that could, some argue, lead to more centralized control over media or government messaging.
How would that affect Canadian actors on U.S. shows?
The worry is it could potentially discourage productions, especially cross-border ones, from tackling content seen as too controversial or critical. a kind of chilling effect on the stories themselves.
So it's a multi-layered thing, what actors feel safe saying, and maybe even what kinds of shows get made in the first place if they involve U.S.-Canadian collaboration.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity.
Okay, let's pivot again. Beyond individual rights at the border or speech concerns, what about the actual nuts and bolts of making these shows? Are there U.S. policies that could directly disrupt production?
Absolutely. This gets into the economics and logistics, and yes, there are very real concerns here.
Like the talk of tariffs, that seems like a big one.
A huge one. If the proposal for, say, a 25% tariff on Canadian exports actually goes ahead, that could have major ripple effects on film and TV production.
How specifically? These industries are so intertwined.
Well, think about the costs. Any materials, equipment, maybe even specialized props or set pieces imported from Canada into the U.S. for a shoot would suddenly cost significantly more.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it cuts both ways. While a lot of standard gear might be sourced locally, specialized things often cross the border. Think unique textiles, certain camera lenses, specific set decoration items. Those costs could jump.
And could Canada retaliate?
That's the other fear. Canada might respond with its own measures. Maybe they'd adjust the tax credits that are currently a big lure for U.S. productions filming up here.
Right, those tax credits are crucial.
Or they might even make it harder to access certain Canadian filming locations. It's not just about the cost of lumber or whatever. It signals a potential shift away from easy cross-border trade towards more protectionism. That could really change the game for international co-productions.
Yeah, that sounds like it could create serious logistical nightmares.
Yeah.
And it's not just the cost of making the shows, right? What about the audience?
Good point. There are also worries about consumer spending overall. If broad tariffs lead to higher prices for everyday stuff, people might just have less money left over for.
Movie tickets, streaming subscriptions.
Exactly. Less disposable income could hit the box office, could affect viewership numbers, impacting the financial viability of these projects.
It really is all connected, isn't it?
It is.
What about currency fluctuations? The Canadian dollar being weaker. Is that good or bad?
That's always a complex one. On the one hand, a weaker Canadian dollar makes it relatively cheaper for U.S. studios to film in Canada. So that could attract productions.
Okay, a potential upside then.
Potentially. But it also increases costs for Canadian companies within the production chain if they rely on imported U.S. equipment or materials. Those suddenly become more expensive for them.
So, kind of a double-edged sword there.
Very much so.
And are we seeing any signs of like a buy American push, specifically for film and TV, a desire to keep productions within the U.S.?
There's definitely concern about that sentiment potentially growing, a sort of made in USA focus that might lead to fewer U.S. shows choosing to film in Canada, regardless of cost savings.
Plus, competition from U.S. states trying to lure production back.
Right. We've seen efforts, for instance, in California. Governor Newsom has been actively working to boost the film industry there, offering incentives. That increases the competition Canada faces.
It just feels like the whole foundation for cross-border production might be facing some, I don't know, instability.
Instability is a good word for it, and you can't ignore the tech giants in this either.
How do they fit in?
Well, there's a concern that major U.S. tech companies, the big streaming platforms, might try to use their economic muscle to influence Canadian content policies, like that online streaming act we mentioned.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Leverage their investment power.
Potentially, yeah. It all adds up to a picture of uncertainty for these collaborations that have been, pretty standard for decades.
And this brings us right back to the concerns being raised by people actually working in the industry.
Absolutely. It's not abstract for them. We mentioned Sean Majumder earlier.
I'm trying to show.
He made the decision to move back to Canada. And he cited the political climate in the U.S., specifically post-Trump election, calling it superheated.
Really? That was a factor?
He said so, yeah.
Hmm.
He talked about wanting Canada's relative stability and safety. Plus, practical things like healthcare costs factored in, too.
So these aren't just distant policy debates. They have real-world consequences for people's lives and careers.
Definitely.
And it's exactly this kind of environment, these concerns, that have fueled that hashtag Protect Fromily campaign we talked about.
Yes, precisely. Hashtag Protect Fromily is very much a grassroots, fan-driven movement. It's the community around the show.
Fromily?
The Fromily, exactly, as they call themselves. They're coming together to really advocate for the show's cast, the crew, the creators, the whole production.
It's amazing. It shows how connected people feel to the show.
It really does. It's honestly inspiring to see fans rally like this proactively. It says a lot about their passion, not just for the story, but for the people making it.
A fan protects their Fromily. I saw that phrase
Oh.
associated with it. I love that.
Yeah, it captures it perfectly.
So, what are the specific things the campaign is trying to address? What are they worried about?
Well, it directly targets the three main areas we've been discussing.
Right.
One, the increased risk of privacy issues and potential detentions at the U.S. border, specifically for the Canadian talent working on From.
Right. The Jasmine Mooney type of scenario. Right.
Exactly. Two, the potential limits on their freedom of expression, whether that's in Canada due to local laws or while working in the U.S., given the political climate.
Okay. The speech concerns.
And three, the very real possibility of disruptive U.S. policies, tariffs, immigration changes, that kind of thing, impacting the show's actual production schedule, maybe even its future.
Got it. So, border issues, speech issues, and production stability.
That's the core of it.
And how are fans getting involved? If someone listening cares about From and wants to support this, what can they do?
The campaign has laid out a few key actions. The most visible thing is just using the hashtag Protect Fromily on social media, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. Just get it seen, raise awareness.
Spread the word.
Yeah. They're also encouraging people to share information about these potential challenges, to contact their elected officials, both U.S. and Canadian, presumably, and advocate for policies that support these kinds of international creative projects.
Making their voices heard politically.
Uh-huh. Also, supporting organizations that work on privacy rights or creative freedom, and even creating fan art.
Art.
Yeah, like videos, drawings, written pieces celebrating the show From, but also amplifying the campaign's message, using creativity to support the creators.
That's a really well-rounded and, frankly, impressive approach for a fan campaign.
It really is. It shows a lot of thoughtful organization.
And Douglas E. Hughes, he plays the man in yellow on From.
Yes.
A very memorable character he's spoken out to, hasn't he?
He has. He did a live stream recently, and he talked about his own broader concerns, things like the general U.S.-Canada relationship. He mentioned perceived Canadaphobia, and just general worries about safety and privacy for Canadian entertainment folks traveling to the U.S. for work on shows like From.
So it's clear there's a real, understandable sense of unease bubbling up within the From community from cast to fans.
Absolutely. And this hashtag Protect Fromily campaign is just a very direct, passionate response to that. It gives fans a concrete way to show their support for the show they love and for the people who pour their talent into making it happen.
Well, this has certainly been quite an eye-opening deep dive. A bit concerning, perhaps, but important to understand these potential challenges facing Canadian talent on U.S. productions in, say, 2025.
It's a changing landscape for sure.
Let's just quickly recap the main points, especially thinking about From and the hashtag Protect Fromily campaign.
Okay, so summarizing, we've looked at that increased risk of privacy violations, device searches, even potential detentions at the U.S. border for Canadians that could directly hit the From cast and crew traveling back and forth.
Right. Border vulnerability.
Then, the potential squeeze on free speech for Canadian artists, concerns stemming from laws in Canada and the climate and policies in the U.S. That could affect the creative atmosphere around the show.
Speech constraints.
And finally, those big picture U.S. policies, possible tariffs, maybe stricter immigration enforcement, the Made in USA, push things that could genuinely disrupt the production logistics, the budget, maybe even threaten the continuation of U.S.-Canadian shows like From.
Production stability risks.
Got it.
And for you, listening, hoping to get a quick grasp on complex issues, we really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insight into the specific hurdles the Fromily might be facing. The hashtag Protect Fromily campaign really throws a spotlight on how these sometimes dry policy shifts can directly intersect with the entertainment world and how fans can actually step up.
It really does. And maybe it leaves us all with a final thought to chew on.
Yeah.
How is this increasing interconnectedness of global entertainment shows made across borders, watched worldwide, how is that going to be shaped by national policies, by border practices, by political winds in the coming years?
That's a big question.
It is. And what's the role for fans in all this? Is it just consuming the content, or is it also about navigating these complexities, maybe even advocating for the kind of international cultural collaborations like From that brings so much to our screens?
Something to think about. We definitely encourage you to check out the hashtag Protect Fromily hashtag, see what the fans are doing, and maybe join the conversation about the future of these creative partnerships in today's world.
It seems like being a fan these days can also mean being an advocate. It's a powerful shift.